They were known for their cruelty. When they would invade and conquer a place, there are different ways to invade, right? Sometimes, like the Babylonians, when they would invade a place, their idea was, we will make you like us, right? So we're going to invade, we're going to take over, but then we are going to force you basically to assimilate to who we are. Not the Syrians. When they invaded, their objective was to just utterly destroy. There was an ancient monument discovered in the ruins of Assyria, and I want to read for you one of the inscriptions on it. And this was written by a king at this time who had conquered a city, and it says, "Their men, young and old, I took as prisoners. Of some I cut off the feet and hands. Of others I cut off the noses, ears, and lips. Of the young men's ears I made a heap. Of the old men's heads I built a tower." Exactly. See, I see your face. She's like, it seems a little bit harsh, right? But they were known for this. They were very cruel. They were very, and they were feared because of this. Throughout this time, people, other cities that surrounded or bordered Assyria were constantly afraid that they would come in and invade and take over and destroy. And in fact, we know that Israel was in fact conquered or invaded by the Assyrians in 715 BC. So for Jonah, the Ninevites weren't just non-Israelites, right? They weren't just outsiders. They were people who he would have grown up legitimately fearing. They were people who he would have experienced as folk who have terrorized, who have victimized, right? So I want you to hold on to that as I read for you Jonah's reaction to what God does for the Ninevites. So God has now, the Ninevites have repented. They have said, we want to worship this God. Thank you, Jonah, for spreading this message. And this is what Jonah feels in chapter 4. It says, "But Jonah was greatly displeased and became angry. He prayed to the Lord, 'O Lord, is this not what I said when I was still at home? That is why I was so quick to flee to Tarshish. I knew that you are a gracious and compassionate God, slow to anger and abounding in love, a God who relents from sending calamity. Now, O Lord, take away my life, for it is better for me to die than to live.' But the Lord replied, 'Have you any right to be angry, Jonah?' Jonah went out and sat down at a place east of the city. There he made himself a shelter, sat in its shade and waited to see what would happen to the city. Then the Lord God provided a vine and made it grow up over Jonah to give shade for his head to ease his discomfort. And Jonah was very happy about the vine. But at dawn the next day, God provided a worm, which chewed the vine so that it withered. When the sun rose, God provided a scorching east wind, and the sun blazed on Jonah's head so that he grew faint. He wanted to die and said, 'It would be better for me to die than to live.' But God said to Jonah, 'Do you have a right to be angry about the vine?' 'I do,' he said. 'I'm angry enough to die.' But the Lord said, 'You have been concerned about this vine, though you did not tend to it or make it grow. It sprang up overnight and died overnight. But Nineveh has more than 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left, and many cattle as well. Should I not be concerned about that great city?'" So, Jonah's response is that it would be better for me to die than to live. It would be better for me to die. When we talk about multiculturalism and racial reconciliation, what we have to remember is that for some on this journey, God's call to go from your comfort zone, God's call to be united with the body, a body that looks like a little bit of everything, God's call to do that is painful. It's not just, uncomfortable. It's not just challenging. It's not just learning things you didn't know before. It's painful. For some, it means going to those who have hurt you. It means going to those who you have experienced suffering at their hands. It means being reconciled to folk who have not loved you, who have not cared for you, who have not bothered to hear your story or value your story. For some of us on this journey, it is painful. So it makes sense then that some people would say, I'm done. I don't feel like it anymore. I'm tired. And understand that it's not just people of color for whom the journey is painful. I remember in college there was a young woman who, God bless her, just very sweet person, extremely naive person, very clueless woman, but just desired to do right. She had a good heart. But without fail, she said the most offensive things. She did not mean it. She didn't mean any harm by it, but just the most offensive things. One of my first conversations with her, she said, she asked me about, my hair, and we were talking about hair, and she was like, oh, that's so interesting, because I know that black people don't wash their hair. I mean, I know you guys just don't mind being dirty. Like, well, no, that's not it exactly. But she didn't she honestly did not mean anything by it. And initially, I didn't want to have anything to do with this child. I avoided her until I saw her. But as I got to know her, I had to get to know her. I was an RA, and she was on my floor, and so we kept having to have these interactions. And I found that, God bless her, she truly did mean well. She just didn't think all of the time. Well, she desired very much to be involved with this thing about racial reconciliation. Any black person that she saw, she wanted to talk to. She had questions. She wanted to let you know, look, I'm learning, I care. But every black person she talked to, she offended. And so very few people wanted to interact with her. So you can imagine the pain she felt, right? So clearly she was wrong. You don't tell people that they just like to be dirty. But from her perspective, right, she's stepping out. She's trying. She's trying very hard. People around her at our school at the time, racial reconciliation was very big. People talked about it all the time. She felt like God was calling her to do this. So she says, here I am, Lord. I'm stepping out. I'm trying to build these relationships. But no one likes me. And it got ugly. Because there were people, some folk would just dismiss her, but other folk would say not so nice things to her. So it was painful for her. It was very painful for her to constantly keep going, to constantly say, I'm going to try, I'm going to learn, I'm going to try to receive what people are telling me, and I'm just going to keep trying to build relationships. We have all experienced pain in this journey. If you have been on it any number of times, there has been silent hurts, maybe not so silent hurts. So this journey is not always an easy one. Some of us can relate to Jonah. When God says, I desire a church that is multiracial. I am a God that is so big you could never fully grasp me. And the only way you can begin to get your heads around who I am is to experience who I am for other people. There are parts of God I absolutely cannot see if the only way I ever learn to worship is the way that is comfortable to me. There are parts of God you cannot see if the only way you ever learn to engage with the Lord is the ways that you grew up being comfortable with, right? The church that I go to is a multiracial church. And so when we first started, I'm a very expressive person in worship, and I come from a Pentecostal background. I will do a lap around the sanctuary in a heartbeat. I'm that girl. That's who I am. And it was extremely difficult for me when we started worshiping and there would be people just standing there like this. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. Folks standing there like this. Like, you're not worshiping God. You're not gonna worship God. You don't want to worship the Lord, and you couldn't convince me the white folk worship God. I was like, no, they don't. No, they don't. I don't know. They may love Him, but they don't know how to worship Him, right? But as I have stayed in this journey, one thing that I have learned is I see a different part of God, right? When I learn to experience worship like my brothers and sisters who can just stand there and be fully engaged with the Lord. Fully engaged with the Lord. But they're just standing here. It's a quiet kind of a worship. And we have a God that speaks in a still, small voice. And there are times when we just need to be still before the Lord. That's a powerful way to worship. And on the other side, some of y'all who stand like this. need to learn that we serve a God who created instruments and who is mighty and who is active and creative and moving. And so raising our hands and jumping and dancing